So we were trying to create something musically that was quite challenging, but something both of us enjoyed, combining both of our influences. So my influences being sort of the heavier stuff, Children of Bodom, Cannibal Corpse, and then Josh's influences being somewhat lighter, so creating a nice blend of the two styles to create something unique.
We were trying to find influences that were similar to both of us, or in fact the same for both of us. Like alternative metal is taking two genres and combining them, and one of them is a metal genre. So yeah, we had to combine what we enjoyed into metal. So our alternative metal was sort of the melodic, progressive stuff, and then the heavier sort of almost gent, but not quite there. Definitely I thought that since I hadn't mixed much metal before, that it would be a challenge. I'd heard a lot of it, so I was familiar with sort of the techniques and the styles, but I wanted to give it a go for myself because I thought that it would enhance my abilities, expand my horizons, so to speak.
So we wrote the music by one person would usually come up with a riff at home by themselves. They'd send the Logic project across, and the other person would come up with something, and maybe we'd send it back and the other person wouldn't like it, but they'd get inspiration from what the other person had written, and it was just constantly building on these ideas that otherwise we wouldn't have come up with by ourselves.
Yeah. Right then. So we got... Turn this one down, I think it might be a bit longer. Oh yeah, in this version that's like a bar of 5/8. Alright, just play it, Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I imagine that won't be there.
No.
But that's fine, okay. Pre-production was sort of done as we were writing the music. We'd just be writing the songs and having each other check it over, making sure we weren't going too far in any places. And once everything was more or less written, we had Phil come in, he checked through the songs.
It was really useful to get an objective view and trim the fat from the things that we'd got. Sometimes it would be a bit long or a bit too weird for the... Because this genre kind of has some pop sensibilities. It doesn't go all the way into metal. The pop sensibilities being that a song has to be appealing and catchy and have these hooks that your first listen should draw you in, instead of sort of the heavy metal sort of thing that it's gone into now, is that you might catch some things on the first go round, but there's a lot of layers and things that you have to kind of unpack as you listen, which doesn't necessarily make it worse, but it is harder to get into if you're a first time listener into that genre.
And during that process it was really good because certain sections we'd written would move around, like verses would become pre-choruses, and we'd realise some sections just didn't work at all, so we'd figure out what needed to go there, go home and write some more, and then come back, and it was just, the songs were constantly just growing and being built upon by constant feedback from other people and ourselves. We recorded all the guitars in Josh's flat in his little studio space that he has set up, which was it's quite isolated, so it weren't really many distractions, and it was a comfortable setting. If we'd been in the studio, I imagine it would have been twice as stressful, which would not have been good. So the guitars were going into the Kemper, which is the Magic Amplifier box.
It gives you basically every amp you could ever want in one place. And so tones for this EP were not a problem. In fact, they were a problem because we had too many to choose from. So a good chunk of our time was spent getting the right tone.
Together with the EMGs on the guitar, just created this really smooth but also very heavy, like when we palm muted, it very much, we got the boominess that we wanted, and it was also a very clear tone that we got, so the riffs were able to sort of breathe and you were able to hear every note.
So yeah, the Kemper was plugged straight into the computer. It didn't require reamping or anything, which is another amazing part of that piece of kit, which allows you to get a really good isolation from any environment that you might record in, which means you don't need a studio environment to record guitar. It also means that everything is that much tighter because there's no reverb. If you don't want there to be reverb, there isn't none. Only upon recreating it, reproducing it out of the speakers, do you get the reverb of whatever room you're listening to. So yeah, that really helped us with the precision and everything as well. After we got the right tone, it was just about getting the right performances. During these recordings, due to how we were trying to portray everything, because of the genre that we'd chosen and all that, the main features of those things, of the songs and the influences we were listening to, is definitely precision and articulation. So we definitely needed to try and get that across in our own stuff, which included a lot of time dedicated to making sure, even if the notes and the timing was perfect, that it was played the right way. So that all of the notes had the right articulation as well as the timing and the pitch. But yeah, the identity of metal is that it's precise, as well as being aggressive.
So the guitar recording, for some reason, was by far the most stressful experience I've ever had recording anything. I think, for starters, the guitar we were first going to use just didn't work. I think there were some grounding issues and we just didn't have time to fix it, so we started using my Ibanez 7-string, which was actually a good thing. It worked perfectly for the sound we were going for. Yeah, so when we were recording the guitars, and probably the reason it took so long, was we were focusing so much on every note had to be so articulate, every phrase, every riff had to be played exactly how we knew it was meant to be played. Problem with this is, some of the riffs being quite fast had a lot of notes, and if one note is out, it won't do. And yeah, we would end up recording certain parts, for hours, probably recording them well over 100 times and deleting them, and yeah. In some cases it worked out okay because we're fairly different players, so someone would be a lot better at certain parts than others. Josh playing a lot more bluesy stuff, any of the more lead parts, I think he tackled them a lot more efficiently than I would have done. But then obviously I caused a lot of trouble for him because in riffs that I've written, every note has to be picked. There's no legato. Which I think Josh felt quite unnatural about, so that made that quite difficult. So the differences in playing certainly caused a few difficulties in playing other people's riffs. But again, that's why we spent so long making sure it was perfect, and in the end the differences in playing actually helped because Josh would add some new flavour to my riffs, I'd add some different bits to his, so it worked out well in the end. So the bass was different to the guitars because it wasn't an absolute bloody nightmare, in that we recorded all the bass parts in, I think, about 9 hours. So the bass we actually did in the studios at university, which was obviously different from the guitars which we did at Josh's home.
On the most part, studio time is more stressful than home recording time. But in this case, it didn't really affect us. And so we came into the university studios, we set everything up so that the bass was just recording straight into the desk, into the computer, similarly to the guitars, but without a tone applied. So it was just the raw tone of the bass. And this allowed some messing around with tones later on in the process when we were mixing, or when I was mixing. And so then in that regard, I was able to research how, obviously, Periphery and Trivium and all these influences and reference bands that we've been drawing from, how they approach their bass, what they want to achieve from their bass tone, which obviously, being metal, you could have guessed it's distorted tones. But the interesting thing is that you still need to get that precision out of the bass, even though it might not be as prominent in those sorts of areas of the mix as the guitars. If you just distort a bass tone, the low end just becomes horrible, and so you got to split it into 2 sections, or in our case 3 sections, and kind of treat them differently so that the low end is not distorted and nice and controlled, and then as you get higher up you can distort more and more so that it then blends into a super instrument with the guitar. You don't necessarily have to focus as much on articulation as you do with the guitars, because there's lots of elements in a mix that mask the frequencies that are present in the very beginnings of the bass tone. So due to these factors, we could really just focus on getting a really good feel and enjoy ourselves while we were playing the bass. That meant that we did the bass in much less time than we were doing the guitars, just in one studio session overnight.
And I think just because we weren't so focused on every single note being perfect, we just got through the songs a lot quicker. I think we spent 2 hours per song. We were happily just trading the bass. Someone would record this part, someone would record another part. Much opposed to the guitars, where everybody had to record everything. So in the guitars, Josh is on the right side, I'm on the left for almost all of it, and it was just nice for the bass parts being one part. And yeah, absolutely no complaints about the bass recording at all. Just real easy and a real relief after having spent about a month and a half recording guitars. I think we were a bit concerned that we'd be spending a month and a half on bass as well. So to have it all done in a single evening was, I think, brought a lot of confidence back into the project. I think we were ready to keep working after that.